Oh, welcome everyone. Uh, I see a few folks are beginning to come in from the waiting room. We are delighted to have you with us. We'll give a minute or two for people to get in, and then we will get started. Very excited to have you with us, and we're so grateful that you have joined us for this session this afternoon. I'm going to start sharing my screen. So welcome to our introduction to trauma responsive care and our overview of ACEs, PIECES, and action. We are delighted to have you with us this afternoon. I am Larry McCullough. I'm Executive Director of Pinetree Institute and have a background in behavioral sciences, and Pinetree has been working in the area of adverse childhood experiences and positive experiences for a number of years now as a focus, doing a lot of programs around the state of Maine, the state of New Hampshire, and have really looked at how we might be able to share this information. Joined this afternoon by Carolyn Eastman. And Carolyn, say hello.
Hi, like Larry said, my name is Carolyn Eastman. I am a former social worker and 30-year educator. I started with Pinetree Institute in 2020 with Larry and helped to oversee our master trainer program, which raised awareness for ACEs and positive childhood experiences, and currently have been working on the trauma responsive certificate program with different cohorts throughout New Hampshire and Maine.
Yeah. So we've been working with some of this content for a while now and are really excited to share some of the insights coming out of it with you. A little word about Pinetree Institute. If you're not familiar with Pinetree, Pinetree is based in Elliott, Maine. And we work in three broad areas: do education and training, much of it around trauma-informed care. We work a lot with community collaboration and manage or sponsor several community coalitions: the Greater Portsmouth Recovery Coalition, the Youth Wellness Coalition, the York County Recovery Ready Community Coalition. Pinetree is also the sponsor, in partnership with Portland Recovery Community Center, PRCC, of Recovery Friendly Workplace for the state of Maine. And in that capacity, we serve statewide. The picture at the bottom is the Learning Center. And you may see I'm actually in that learning center right now, speaking from there. Old 200-year-old farmhouse and two barns that has been turned into a retreat and workshop center as our base of operations. We work largely in Maine and New Hampshire, although some of our programs reach across the country. So very happy to be here and share some of this information with you. Very straightforward agenda today. We're going to start with looking at adverse childhood experiences. Many of you are familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, so we'll do that fairly quickly. It's really an introduction and overview, the base for some of the rest. And we'll talk about positive experiences and some of the research related to that. And then a big focus on what we do to take action. This has been evolved really as our concern is it's great to have this information, but what do we do about it? And when we've done workshops, that's what people say. Great information, what do we do? So we want to share with you some of the things that people have done as a result of working with this information. And then at the very end, we have an invitation to you to join some other programs. With that, I'm going to dive right in. And again, I'm going to do a very quick overview of the whole area of adverse childhood experiences. This could be a whole day seminar. We're going to do it in 5 to 10 minutes, but just know that we're touching the high points. There's a lot more depth if you want to dig into this information. Many of you may know the original research was done in the 1990s. Two researchers, Dr. Rob Anda on the right, Dr. Vince Folletti on the left. And Rob Anda was at the CDC, Vince Folletti was at Kaiser. Turned out they were both looking at behavioral determinants of health, or what you might call social indicators of health. And they said, you know, we really need to do some research on what these things, what impact they have. So they designed a study over 17,000 people with Kaiser Permanente, and they looked at three types of household adversity. Three types of abuse: physical, emotional, and social; two types of neglect: physical and emotional; and five types of what you could call household dysfunction: mental illness, incarceration of an adult. In their research, mother treated violently. This has since been expanded to domestic violence more generally, substance use in the home, and divorce. And they just asked, did these things happen to you? And what they found, and it's important to remember that this population was largely middle class, largely college educated, not at all what we might think of as an at-risk or marginalized population. And what they found is very high incidences of many of these. There's a very moving scene. There's a film called Resilience, which you can actually watch, where Rob Anda talks about this work. And he talks about the first time he pulled the results up on his computer and saw the frequency with which many of these things happened, which he had no idea. He said, and he actually brought tears to his eyes, that he was so moved to see some of these results. Over 25% reported physical abuse or substance abuse in the home. Around 20% sexual abuse, emotional neglect, even parental violence was high. So they found very high incidences in this population. And then they did a very interesting thing, which has come to have a lot of impact in our understanding of why this is important. They said, what if we were to look at multiple adversity experiences of adversity? And they did just a simple count. How many of these things happened to you? Now, in the Kaiser population, about a third said none. None of those things really happened. But about 10% of the population, 4 or more of these things. And this turns out to be important because what they found is that there's a correlation between the number of adverse experiences and the rate of various health issues as a teenager and as an adult. So what they discovered was that the ACE score, in a way, is a proxy for a dose. There's a dose relationship. The more ACEs, the higher the level of risk of serious adult health complications. So this is the Kaiser study. This has since been replicated in many other areas. One study that I find particularly helpful and interesting, and also a little discouraging. This study was done with Florida juvenile offenders. So these were teenagers that were in incarceration. And on this graph, the blue lines here are the frequencies in the Kaiser study. Okay, so about a third had 0. The orangey brown lines here are the frequency in this juvenile population. And you'll see that almost none of them had 0, but you'll see that at 4 or more, nearly half of that population had experienced 4 or more of these adverse experiences. The sad part about this is what we've done. These are kids who presumably have acted out, but have had really traumatic experience, and our response to them is to punish them. This raises questions for us in our understanding of what's the best way for us to respond to these. The reason this dose impact is so important is that there's a very direct link to risks as an adult. So the chart on the left, this looks at numbers of ACEs and intravenous drug use. There's similar charts for opiate use, for other kinds of drug use. But you'll see that the incidence of at 4 or more ACEs is about a 3 to 4 times the rate of an individual who's had no adverse experiences. The chart on the right looks at suicide with 0 ACEs. About 1 out of 100 people attempt suicide. It's not 0 attempts, but about 1 out of 100. At 3 ACEs, that number jumps tenfold to 10. And at 7 or more ACEs, that number doubles to about 20 out of 100. So about 20% of individuals with 7 or more ACEs at some point in their lives will attempt suicide. So clearly a very big impact. And this is two areas of health that we know are impacted. But there's a lot of other studies that have found that there's impacts far beyond this. Laura Porter and Rob Andrew, who shared this slide with us, they call this the oil slick slide, right? So the oil slick in the middle, this is the percentage of a particular issue that can be attributed to differential ACE scores. Now, I'm going to unpack that a little bit because it's kind of a tricky concept. So what this is population attributable risk. And the analogy that I like to use is cigarette smoking. So we know that for lung cancer, 80% of lung cancers are attributable to cigarette smoking, but 20% are not. And we don't know which 20% are actually not attributable or going to show up. So this idea of population attributable risk is you can predict on a population basis, but you cannot predict on an individual basis. So we don't know 80% of the people who get lung cancer smoked. We don't know which 80%. So there are factors that can mitigate this. And it's not predictive for individuals. This is really important. So if you're seeing some of this research for the first time or reflecting on it, the first time I saw it, I happened to have a very high ACE score. So I was going through the list and I said, oh, this. And I was getting a little stressed out. It's like, does that mean that I'm like terminally in trouble? And actually had the discussion with Laura Porter and said, no, this is not predictive on an individual basis, but it is very predictive on a population basis. So if we look at this oil slick chart, 78% of IV drug use down in the corner here can be predicted based on differential ACE scores. 67% of alcoholism, 65% of suicide, nearly 70% of mental illness, and so on around the circle. What's interesting around the circle is some things that we don't even think of that might be impacted, like out of work for more than a year, not graduating from college, job injuries. 25% of job injuries correlate with trauma experiences as a child, falling, all of these issues. So the big question then is, what do we do? And I like this analogy of the oil slick. Okay, so you've got this disc. Imagine if you turned this disc flat and you've got the oil. And let's say we're going to push really, really hard on IV drug use. We're going to try to get that IV drug use number down. What happens to the oil? It goes somewhere else, right? We haven't solved the problem. We're just pushing the oil around. So the key is if we drill a hole in the middle and we drain the oil, right? If we reduce the adversity, then we're impacting IV drug use, but we're also impacting all of these other things. So the concept of working with ACEs is the concept of addressing root cause and addressing the reasons that contribute to all of these. Doesn't mean we'll eliminate them, but it means we can address the root cause. So that's the big insight that comes out of this. And then, it jumped to a different screen. Since that time, Rob and Folletti looked at household dysfunction, and that's one big category of adverse experiences. Since that time, it's been understood that there are other sources of adversity. And we like to think of these 3 realms of ACEs. So there's community sources, things like bullying, we know is a big impact. Racism, sexism has an impact. Poverty has a big impact. environmental factors, the destruction of communities or environments, even natural disasters can have an impact. So each of these can have an impact in adult health. What we know, though, and we love this quote from the former president of the Academy of Pediatrics, ACEs are the single greatest unaddressed public health issue facing our nation today. And a couple of points here, unaddressed, because we don't really address them directly. And we often ask the question, and in groups, why don't we? Well, these are really hard to talk about. Stigma is attached to many of them. A lot of people are not going to raise their hands and say, hey, my family is in complete distress, or I'm being abused, or it's difficult conversations. So we need to be even more intentional about how we address them. Okay. So now for the good news. And this is the point. I was just in an in-person session last week where we were discussing a lot of these same things, and we got to the good news slide. And at this point, you like feel the whole group exhale. It's like, yeah, I need some good news here. And the fact is that there is a lot of good news. Okay, in the past few years, there's been research on what are some positive experiences and what are the impacts of those positive experiences. Is there a chance that having positive experiences could help to buffer the impact of the adverse experiences? And you can, Christina Bethel was one of the lead researchers. She was with us a couple of years ago working with these issues. Great article. You can Google NPR positive experiences and read about the research. But they did a very interesting thing. This was another large epidemiological study. It was the state of Wisconsin, over 7,000 people, statewide survey on their behavior risk survey. And they added in questions about positive experiences. And these are the 7 that they were able to ask about. So were you able to talk to your family about your feelings? Did your family stand up for you? Did you feel safe and protected? Were there 2 non-parent adults who took interest in you? Did you feel supported by your friends? Did you feel a sense of belonging in high school? That one was interesting because I thought, well, maybe it's all over by high school, but it turns out that it's not. Enjoyed participating in community traditions. So they asked these, what's interesting about this list? The top 3 mostly take place in the family. The bottom 4 are really community-based. And for many of us on the call right now, these are things that we can have a direct impact on. We can work with these with children and youth. We can think about what their sense of belonging is. We can think about how are they getting friendships. We can help with cultivating friends. There are things that we can do. And it turns out that, in fact, these are very important. So these slides are a little dense, but on the left-hand slide, so green is good. What they found was that people who reported high levels of these 7 things were much less likely to report incidences as adults of adult depression and mental health. So they had a protective factor, each one of them. And as we would hope, there was also a dose effect. The more of these positive experiences, the less likely people were to experience, in this study, they looked at mental health and depression, were less likely to report adult instances of serious mental health or depression. Since the time of this study, this was just 5, 6 years ago, there have been many other studies now that have replicated this finding, that in fact, positive experiences can buffer the impact of adverse experiences. So our understanding is really growing. You can think of this as a tree. The roots of the tree are all of the factors that create the environment that makes it possible to have the positive experiences: affordable and safe housing, health infrastructure, quality early childhood programs, economic support systems. They set the base. And the leaves of the tree are things that we can do: safety and stability in the home, supportive friendships, close relationships with caring adults. It's like the leaves and blossoms on the tree that become possible. And all of these things then create the context that make these positive experiences possible. And we're starting to understand the dynamics of it. So high pieces, positive experiences, lead to better mental health and emotional well-being, which lessens the likelihood of risky behaviors, improving overall health and strengthening community resilience. And they can look at that direct relationship among those. And that means that we can then teach parents and children about the dynamics of thriving, particularly with parents and in schools, how we support emotional skill building in schools, how we work with parents and how parents can partner with others in developing parenting skills and developing those relationships. We want to share a video with you, which we think is really fun, that sort of illustrates the dynamic of the parent-child interaction and the positive experiences. And I'll say a word about it before I start it. So the dynamic is one that can be called serve and return. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Barbara Fredrickson, worked a lot in positive education, a wonderful book, Love 2.0, who really expands the build and broaden theory of love relationships, that we build those relationships over time and broaden them through our experiences. And the dynamic of that is what can be called serve and return. There is an action from an individual that is responded to by another individual. In a lot of psychology programs, we talk about this as the process of attunement. It's the dynamic of attuning to another person so that when they give us something, we return it and they give it back. And it's that dynamic. So we love this little video, which we think illustrates this serve and return process really nicely. I will cue that up for us.
At Wayfair, we get pretty excited about furniture. Around here, it's not a patio, it's patio. I love the.
Did you understand it though? No. Uh-huh. Oh, not this one. This some Instagram now. Yeah, that's right. But I was wondering, I don't know when they're gonna get that season because they will get some stuff this time. Exactly what I was. Oh yeah. Well, don't bring that in. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You like that? Bye-bye. Oh, bro, like, look, you look crazy when you saying that to me. Boy, motherfucker. You're a trip, man. Give me the pound it. Pound it. That's exactly what I thought when they told me that. I was like, nah, but then they came. Man. Hey, you crack me up. You bust me up. I saw, but I didn't see it.
Wayfair, we get pretty excited about furniture. Around here,
So we love that video. And, you know, part of the positive experience is just laughing. So every time we see the video, I just laugh and chuckle. But it illustrates so much, right? How this child who's so open to that experience with his dad, like making a comment and then turning to look, oh, and getting a response, and then turning to look and getting a response, sharing the rhythms, sharing all of that. And that bonding experience clearly driving that sense of attunement between the father and the child in this case, but obviously could be any relationship and doesn't have to even be parental, right? It can be any relationship where we're really attuning. And it also reminds me of um, how impressionable and sponge-like kids are, that they will soak up. They're looking for that reaction. You know, he blah, 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 and now what are you going to react? And it doesn't even matter if I understand what the reaction is. I know I can feel the intent as a child. And that's that dynamic that we're looking for, that serve and return. So we just love that. I saw some parts floating up during that, which is really great. So to bring this all together, then we love this quote from Peter Benson, who was one of the founders and CEO for many years of Search Institute. If you're not familiar with Search Institute, I encourage you to look at their research. Over 30 years of really solid research on children and youth and healthy development. And this was Peter Benson's conclusion that relationships were the single most important factor. And I like to read it. After decades, and they did over 30 years, forming hypotheses, conducting surveys, crafting and rewriting definitions, analyzing data, writing journal articles, Search Institute researchers and practitioners have arrived at a surprisingly simple conclusion. Nothing has more impact in the life of a child than positive relationships. So that really sets the frame for our role. And the thinking that we bring to this is, in what way can I create the environment, create the circumstances, have the interactions, provide the support that will create positive relationships in the lives of the people that I'm working with? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn to talk about some of the ways in which folks that we have worked with have actually taken action and why we see that as being so important. So Carolyn.
Thank you. So thank you, Larry. So up until you've learned about ACEs, had this nice review from Larry, we've also talked about positive childhood experiences. And at Pinetree Institute, we've really been very intentional about working toward this idea and adapting this PACES connection infographic to really a path to a trauma responsive society. So once we start to learn about information, many of us, maybe most of us on this webinar, are trauma informed. And what does it take for us to then become trauma responsive, where we take the information we've learned and we transfer and apply it into our communities and to make changes in our workplaces. And so that's what Pinetree has been working on for the past 5 years, is really digging in, being very intentional about what does it take to go from learning about something to then doing something and taking action to improve communities and families and the outcomes for children. So Larry had mentioned earlier about PIECES, positive childhood experiences, and how they correlate to eventually strengthening community resilience and prosperity. And we talk about some of these programs that we develop related to mentoring programs, After school programs, we know, are really great at developing relationships with youth. And we also know arts and cultural programs around bringing people together in community, breaking down silos, and really interconnecting people across our communities. I'd like to highlight, so back in 2020, Pinetree Institute started a program called the Master Trainer Program. And it kicked off with Dr. Rob Anda and Laura Porter, providing some 2-day training around ACEs, bringing awareness, and Laura Porter's expertise around really improving communities through this knowledge and community impact. And we had 30 master trainers that volunteered 3 years of their time. Once they were trained up, then they went out into their communities and really just gave initially these presentations on ACEs. And every time we gave a presentation, people were always like, so what can we do about it? What's the action? What do we do now? Thank you for this information. And so over time, those 30 master trainers started having an impact. They started impacting their workplaces. We started seeing them impact their communities in different ways. And I wanted to lift up some of the actions that were taken as a result of their learning. For example, we have Patrice Baker. She is now at SAU 21, and she's currently the early intervention outreach specialist. And so in her role, it's really a K through 12 role at the SAU, this school district in New Hampshire. But then she created this other program, this preventative, proactive program for those families and caregivers that aren't yet in school, but to help them connect with one another. It's called Hatch. She just recently started this program, and they meet at a playground. They connect with one another. They help inform each other about how to prepare for school, start to build some connections. And that really is a proactive approach to, I already know some people, I've already met some kids. And now I'm entering into the school district, having some knowledge and feeling a little more confident. And we love that, right? This idea of relationship building really does create these positive childhood experiences in a very intentional way. And I think what you'll see throughout these next few slides is this idea of this intentionality. We also have a former master trainer, Sarah Shanahan with Haven. And Sarah, she is the education and training director at Haven currently. And they started implementing what's called Camp Hope. And Camp Hope allows a week of overnight camp for children that have experienced some type of trauma in their lives. And what they found as a result of 1 week at Camp Hope was more effective than 3 months of talk therapy. So we're seeing another example of impact. And then we have Katie Sewell. Katie Sewell started out, she was a master trainer at the YMCA. She was a summer camp counselor and training, at the YMCA, doing summer camps. And she decided with what she learned through the master trainer program at Pinetree around ACEs and PIECES and some of the actions you can take, she then went back to the YMCA and started informing summer camp counselors around ACEs and PIECES and this intentionality around creating positive experience for youth. What they found over time was that the camp counselors were staying. They were coming back from year to year. They also found that true to be the same to be true for the campers. So this type of intentionality and relationship building really started to have an impact. And the counselors also felt that they were more intentional with their relationship building with the youth in the camps. Over time, what happened for Katie is that while it started maybe in summer camps, she then started training the entire organization, anyone that worked at the Granite Y, and started having this really great impact around raising awareness, not only in ACEs, but then this idea of what can we do about it? This really intentional, positive childhood experiences. And, Dr. Pamela Cantor says that really a positive childhood experiences actually produces oxytocin in the brain and makes people feel something. It's more than being nice and kind, but it's the way you make someone feel. As a result, so this happened over 3 years. We had 30 master trainers. We have many other examples. There's Steve Papajohn, at the Dover Teen Center. He was a master trainer that's gone on to do a whole different intake process for youth that come to the Teen Center. We have Jody Langelotti. She works for Advanced Career Technical Education, and she's been infusing how important career technical education programs are and producing positive childhood experiences. They buffer the impacts, they provide kids with mentors, they have these really self-affirming experiences and start to connect not only with peers that also are interested in certain careers, but they also meet really great mentors and then end up doing internships and creating these really great networks of connection. And then we have Karen Morton Clark, who was with New Hampshire Recovery Friendly Workplace. And initially they were doing some information about what it meant to be an employer in Recovery Friendly Workplace. But then she added components around ACEs to really help employers understand that many that were coming that were in recovery had also experienced some significant trauma and how they could help buffer the impacts of that trauma and be a really supportive workplace for these employees. All of that to say, from all of that learning at Pinetree Institute, we recognized that this needed to continue, that after the 3 years of that program sunsetting, that we really started to think about what could we create that really built upon this initial work and all that we had learned, and how all of these different master trainers actually took the information, applied it into their own setting, and made really impactful changes for youth and families that they served. So what happened was this creation of what we call the Trauma Responsive Certificate Program. Again, we realized that it was more than being informed, but when people were asked to take action and apply that information, we were starting to see in this new program a cohort type of program where there's an online course and meeting together every so often after so many units. We were seeing an impact as well. This is Pedro. He's with YCCAC, York County Community Action Corporation. He is a community health worker, also an asylum seeker, an immigrant. And he took the program, Trauma Responsive Certificate Program. It has components of ACEs, PIECES, brain science. There's lots about what action you can take within the program, about co-regulation as well and different strategies. And Pedro started thinking through the course that he would really like to have other people understand the real consequences of a long migratory journey when children come as immigrants, that they actually have experienced significant trauma. So he created a whole training for YCCAC to help his colleagues really understand, as well as the schools that these children were attending, to really help them understand what types of trauma these children had experienced and how they might create some positive experiences for these children. He's just one example of many. We've had other cohorts, such as EdTech program cohort. We've had Biddeford City offered a cohort that had all different organizations take part through the city of Biddeford, and then went back and created projects in their different organizations. We've had Maine Early Childhood Educator cohort that they were all early childhood educators that were able to come together through this course network and then go back into their organizations and make change. Spurwink was one of those. They had several employees from Spurwink. We've had special education cohorts in different communities. And then the YCCAC cohort, York County Community Action, they were really looking at how they could improve the organization's efforts in serving family, all different types of families. And what we've been receiving in terms of feedback is it allowed them at the end of every trauma responsive certificate program, there's a requirement of an action project. And while initially that might seem scary for many, what it really reinforced was that by taking some action, there's really some significant change that can happen, even within a short period of time. So we're really excited about how we've taken this information, like Larry mentioned, around ACEs. We've taken this information around PIECES, and then we've worked with others in the community to look at how this can take hold in different communities and allowing people to personalize it into their own situation. We're hoping to see more and more of this and to see this happen in more communities. And I'll turn it over to Larry from here.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I should mention, I see that a few folks are using the Q&A button down at the bottom. This is a Zoom webinar. So at the bottom, there is a Q&A function, and we will save some time at the end for questions, comments. Carolyn is tracking those. We'll both take a look at them. So we encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in Q&A as opposed to chat, because Q&A sort of saves it and we can access it. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. So as Carolyn described, this process of looking at the information, the research, and then asking this question, what can I do, leads to some very interesting and exciting applications. And it goes back to a conversation that I had with Laura Porter. It's also captured in the Resilience film of her talking about this. When we were starting this journey 6-7 years ago, we said, how do communities change? How do we move that? What do you need to design for communities to do? And she said, no, that's not the process. That what we need to do is we weave this knowledge throughout the community. We talk with everyone about it. We give people the experiences. We share that information, and people will create very wise actions. And what I loved about some of the things Carolyn shared with you is they're very wise actions. You know, there was nobody telling Katie Sewell that she should take this to the entire YMCA, but she felt that she wanted to do that, and it became her job. Right? It really changed her personal trajectory as part of that. And that's what happens. What we're hoping as we share this. Now, obviously, we have done a very, very quick brush of some of the underlying concepts here. There's a lot more information that we've found to be really valuable. Looking at the neurobiology, for example, what are some of the neurological components? What's the role of the vagus nerve, polyvagal theory? What does that teach us about this? What do we know about the kinds of interaction that build to that can address issues of secondary trauma? Those of us who are working with individuals who are experienced trauma. So a lot of other information. We've just sort of gone over the tips of a couple of icebergs here, and encourage you to find some ways to deepen that knowledge. We want to share with you that Pinetree has a couple of options that are available. There's a 3-hour open enrollment course. This is fully self-paced. It's an online course. You can sign up for it right on the Pinetree website. 3 hours, 3 CEUs that go with it. And it looks at the information and digs a little deeper, includes some of the neurobiology information and some of the thoughts about application. And then we have the trauma responsive certificate program. The certificate program, which Carolyn mentioned, had a number of people who have worked with that. And we've just had really amazing feedback on ways that people understand this knowledge. And now I'm going to find a way to apply it in my work. And we do warn people in the certificate program, it's not just a sit and listen program. At the end, there is an action project where everybody going through says, how could, now that I know this in my role, whether I'm ed tech or special ed or a teacher or a camp counselor or an early childhood teacher or a therapist, whatever my role, now that I know this, what difference could I make? How might I apply this in my work? And that's where really some of that trauma responsive piece comes on. We have really moved in our thinking away from wanting people to be trauma informed, just knowing about it, to really taking action and becoming trauma responsive. So there are some options that Pinetree has developed. You can go on the website, you can sign up. There are some cohorts of the trauma responsive program that you can get the information on upcoming dates on the Pinetree website. And you can also sign up. So those are a few of the options. Whether you take those options or you find other options, there are many other options. we encourage you to really expand and deepen your knowledge in this area, because in our observation, it makes a difference. People who understand this, learn about it, and apply it in their work makes a difference in the lives of the people they work with, and it makes a difference in our lives. Just like the father in that short video, the little boy was getting a lot out of it, but the father was getting a lot out of it too. So this is never a one-way street, right? By applying this, the people we work with gain, and we gain as a result. So encourage you to continue to expand, to deepen, encourage you to check out some of the Pinetree options if that's something that's interesting for you. But above all, really think about, what can I do to respond? How can I be responsive? So our last piece, we invite you to sign up for the Pinetree mailing list. You can go right to Pinetree Institute. I know Carolyn is dropping some of these links in the chat as I speak. And on the Pinetree website, you'll get information about the latest courses. There's an annual conference, always the first Friday in May is our annual conference. Rob and Laura Porter were the first annual conference. Christina Bethel was, I believe, the second annual conference. So we had a series of really great speakers, and encourage you to check that out as well. So with that, I'm going to conclude our formal remarks. And we saved a little bit of time for Q&A and other comments and discussion. I am actually going to stop sharing at this point. Invite Carolyn to come back on screen. And Carolyn, what are you seeing in Q&A? What might we pick up?
We have 3 questions. Rebecca shares, I have found that mainstream medical providers seem ignorant to ACE study, now 30 years old. Yeah, right? Even basic stress, biophysiology or stress trauma, and in my experience, are not open to learning these things. How can systemic change occur to include trauma education, polyvagal awareness, when the medical system seems closed to integrating mind, body, emotions?
Yeah, well, that's a big one.
Yeah. Larry, I might, some of the work, if you're familiar with HOPE, healthy outcomes through positive experience through Tufts Medical, they have actually taken more of a clinical approach to using positive experiences through how we start our conversations from practitioners. They start with positive instead of, so what brings you here today? Why are, what's the problem? They're really starting with the positive and trying to really hone in on the 4 building blocks of what they call the HOPE framework. And that's a really great resource. I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that, but that seems to be more of a clinical slant where they've been really trying to change and alter what you're talking about in terms of the medical system, in terms of awareness and how they're starting to integrate some of this work. Larry, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Rob Anda, who was one of the original researchers, he has really taken this issue to heart. He and Laura Porter have a group called ACE Interface, and Dr. Anda devotes a lot of his time to training doctors. Some of you may be familiar with the work of Nadine Burke-Harris. She is a physician, wrote a wonderful book, The Deepest Well, and she has also worked to try to bring this to medical education. A little side note, my daughter's actually a doctor. She did her degree at University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. And I said to my daughter, so did anybody ever train you on this? She said, oh, well, we had this wonderful person who came in and talked to our whole medical group. In fact, I think she even wrote a book. I said, oh, was that Nadine Burke-Harris? And she said, yeah, that's who it was. Nadine Burke-Harris lives and works in San Francisco, so it makes sense. But it's a big question. And any of you on this call who have connections to the medical community, we encourage you to share this information. We try to engage the medical community whenever we can in coalitions and community work. And it is hugely important. So thank you for raising that question.
We have a couple other questions related to teens. With respect to adolescent development stages, are ACEs and PIECES more significant at different points in development? Is there a point where interventions become less effective? And I'll read the other one too, because they are somewhat related. How does PIECES impact teens with ACEs due to complex trauma versus children who have intervention and PIECES earlier? Have there been studies to show ages and PIECES and the outcomes by age?
So,
The one thing I can share, Larry, is why we engaged with Search Institute. We started engaging with Search Institute for this very reason. You know, when we looked at PIECES, and much of it is around relationship, and what Larry shared, that one slide around relationships as being the most important aspect of kind of this buffering effect with PIECES. Search Institute has done extensive research around adolescence and developing thriving relationships. They have a developmental relationship framework that looks at 5 different elements. They also have research around developmental assets, and they also kind of break down the significance or the relationship between when children have grown in their developmental assets, they actually have less risky behavior. So there's been some research with Search Institute. I put that link in the chat as well. But Larry, I'll turn it over to you to kind of add to that.
Yeah. So this is an area where there is continuing research. I was actually in a presentation yesterday that shared some of the Hope Institute research on adolescent development. The short answer is we don't know for sure. Another answer is there is lots of evidence that positive experiences at any age help to buffer the impact and build strong relationships. I take heart from Christina Bethel's study. There's that one line, felt a sense of belonging in high school. Well, apparently that had a big impact in high school. And I tend to think of, well, high school, maybe it's over. But in my own personal history, I had a lot of traumatic experiences. I went to a great high school and I had great friends. And even though I was older, it had an impact for me. So I think the research is still being done. What I encourage everybody at every age is over-index on positive experiences. We know that those will not hurt. So you're not going to have too many of them. And there is always that understanding that at some level they will help. And I have talked to people who had really terrible teenage years and they got to college and had a great experience. So we are amazingly resilient as a group, human beings, right? We can recover. Our goal is to help make that as easy as possible, providing that positive set of relationships.
A couple other resources that I would add that people might want to check out that I find really interesting related to relationship building, but also with teens in different age groups. Doesn't get at the what exact age, but Linda Darling Hammond and Dr. Pamela Cantor have partnered up with Edutopia. I don't know if you're familiar with Edutopia, but they've been doing videos and providing some examples of what it looks like, feels like, sounds like when you're developing relationships at different stages for youth, whether they're elementary, middle school, high school. So you might want to take a look at those. I found them incredibly helpful. We've used them at Pinetree in some of our trainings just to illustrate how that might look differently at different ages for kids.
There's another question here about programs for people with substance use disorder, and that we know that people with substance use disorder often report very high levels of ACEs in their lives. What we have done, rather than have a specific program, we have the general program. If we have a cohort of people who experience substance use disorder, then we can address that issue within that. The other thing that we have done, Pinetree works with Recovery Friendly Workplace for the state of Maine. And we have woven this knowledge and understanding into those programs as well for employers. So there's a direct application, although we don't have a specific program advertised as for substance use issues. But anytime we have a group that wants to address that, we can tailor the program to meet that need. We also have coalitions, the Greater Portsmouth Recovery Coalition, that works with both the organizations and the individuals impacted by substance use disorder using some of these principles. So maybe not a direct answer the way it's the question is raised, but some related thought. And we do recognize that it's a really important issue and area to discuss.
We've got a couple more questions and a couple more minutes, so I want to make sure we attend. There's 3 more. It says, one of the things I did not see in ACEs was a reference to instances where the child or an immediate family member has a serious illness, example, cancer. Is this an area that has been explored or studied?
Yeah, so if you think back to that 3 realms of ACEs slide, we know that there are a lot of things that impact children developmentally growing up. Illness in the family would certainly be one category of that. Death of a family member would be another. There are many instances of that. And it's important to remember that when Dr. Andam Folletti did the original study, they just picked 10. They said, well, what are 10 things that we hear from our patients that they talk about? And they listed that 10. Since then, people have done lots of other work, and that's where that 3 realms of ACEs comes from. So yes, cancer, serious illness in a family, death in a family, all of these things will have an impact. And it's important to remember too that it's not necessary to really quantify the impact. What we know is, regardless of the experience, the way we address it is by boosting the positive experiences. So it's buffering through increasing the positive experiences.
A couple other, and there's one that talks about someone new to this work. What would be some must visit websites, books, resources we should look for? And I just want to bring the other one to light. Have you connected with any churches with large youth groups that may have staff or volunteers who would love this training, and or a separate cohort for faith-based settings? That last one, we can definitely create a very personalized cohort for those in faith-based settings. We've done that in the past, so that other people can connect within a certain role or organization. Either way, it's been really exciting to do that. And Larry, I know you have a ton of resources for someone starting off that you could recommend.
Yes, and also you can go to the Pinetree website. There's a resource tab where there are a lot of resources there. And Google ACEs. Anything by Rob Anda. I noticed in chat somebody asked how we spell Nadine Burke Harris. It's Nadine, as it sounds, BURKE-HARRIS. Her book is The Deepest Well.
Yeah, and her TED Talk, if you want to get started and just listen to her TED Talk, kind of blows people away. Even if they have a background in ACEs and they feel like they know a lot. I can't tell you how many people it's in our course that have referenced that TED Talk and said, you know, I really learned so much just from that. And then you can go, like Larry said, to read her book.
Yeah, and even about 2 years ago, Oprah Winfrey co-wrote a book on this, and there's a wonderful YouTube video of her talking about her own experience. So that's another resource. So we are at our time. We are so grateful to everyone who has joined us. We know there's a lot of folks. We know people have to jump off, but thank you for joining us. Please be in touch. Check us out and encourage people you know to explore this area. That's how this knowledge spreads. So thanks again. Have a great rest of the afternoon and hope to see you in other venues. Take care.
Thank you.